I took over all of the upper management. So I became the CFO, the COO, the CMO. I became everything. It was the lowest point of my life. It was the darkest moment I've ever endured. Right about December of 2019 is when the crash hit. I just couldn't keep payroll going and got up to about $1 million worth of debt. The Titanic hit the iceberg. That was hard to get through, but I did. I really did something I'd never done before. I tapped mentorship. I asked for help. But you got to shore up right now, and you just got to stop the bleeding. You got to communicate, but don't pay anyone. You have to stop. That allowed us to stop the bleeding, but then comes a whole bunch of barrel of monkeys after that, of course.
Imagine being a successful serial entrepreneur who has consistently delivered massive results, like helping over 300,000 businesses get online and generating over $500 million in revenue, only to face an absolute crash, resulting in over $1 million in debt. That's where our guest found himself in 2019, watching his company spiral downwards towards insolvency while dealing with lawsuits and losing key partners. Yet, by making some incredibly hard choices and strategically refocusing on his core strength, he was able to stabilize the company, double his monthly recurring revenue, and then find his next big hit, successfully doubling his overall revenue again in 2014. How did he hold his team together, walk off massive debt, and pivot back to growth when everything pointed towards failure? Welcome to today's episode of Your Business Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Shapiro, and my guest today is Damien Zamora. Damien, welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir. How are you?
I'm fantastic. I'm so glad you can be here. It's been incredible being part of your entrepreneurial journey over so many years and seeing these ups and downs and man, you have been through it. So help our audience rewind the clock. How did you first get started in this whole world of entrepreneurship?
Well, let's see. So I've been selling since I could put sentences together. I realized very early on, knocking on doors, selling candy, newspaper subscriptions, and all that stuff, that I was really good at it. And that was kind of the way that my parents kind of kept my ADD in check, was get out there and sell some stuff. And so, as early as I can remember, at 16 years old, started my first business and had my first crash about 6 months after that. But then it was what happened next that changed everything. So really, I started this journey when I was 17 years old in the credit card processing industry, which back then in the early 90s, it was a gold rush. Because if you remember, Jeremy, the way that you used to take credit cards was basically using a knuckle buster and a carbon copy receipt. You'd look in a book to see if the card was good. So what I sold was a machine that would instantly give you an approval and give you money in 24 hours instead of 2 weeks. I could literally go door to door and sell those machines, and it made lots of money. And that's where my journey started. So never looked back. I think I had one job at the age of 15 at Clifton's cafeteria for 2 weeks. And I got fired and realized I was unemployable from that moment on.
Oh my gosh. It's so common, I've found, with especially us serial entrepreneurs, that last job was high school era. And ever since, it's just a series of businesses, and that entrepreneurial spirit lives so strong. So bring us forward, Damien, to the Internet Toolbox. You saw massive success with this. What was the Internet Toolbox? What was it like launching nationwide? This was beyond just selling credit card processing locally. You went much bigger. Catch us up to that point.
1996, right? I was grinding it out, 200 accounts a month from these local businesses in Southern California, me and 5 reps. And we drove to lots of miles on that car. We drove to every single business and signed up accounts. And we were doing direct mail strategies to the new business. The people would file a DBA, we'd be in their mailbox. And that's what we were doing. We were grinding it out. It was 1996. I went ahead and put some money for a booth in Anaheim Convention Center at a small business expo. I figured, man, we're going to clean up. Everybody walking around, they need merchant accounts. But nobody signed up. The first day, nobody signed up. And I'm like, this is a waste of money. So the second day I didn't go back. And I left my cards on the table. And that changed my life. That changed my career. That changed the trajectory of everything. We were already making millions of dollars. But what happened was somebody called me on Monday morning from Utah, and they were putting people into a small home-based business. And they struggled to get online credit card processing, they struggled to get credit card processing. They would get declined by their banks. And he said, and that was our USP. We could approve the home-based businesses. So he called me on Monday. I was there on Tuesday. And we did what I would call an embedded partnership. They put me in their kit. I offered them a pre-approval stamp. Basically, when they would sell their business, they could say, when you buy our business, you're pre-approved for a merchant account. So they would get in, they would get to page number 23, they would rip out that application, they would fax it to my company. That's right. Fax it to my company in the mid 90s. We went from 200 accounts a month to 600 accounts a month in 30 days. And then I said, man, do you know anybody else that does what you do? And he introduced me to a guy in Utah, Provo, Utah, maybe 2 miles up the road, named Borges Lamont. They did a completely different business, but they wanted the same offer of being able to offer these pre-approved merchant accounts. And we went to 800 accounts the next month. So really right there, we suddenly went from driving around to everything to 1,000 accounts a month in less than 90 days. And that changed everything financially. And so then what started to happen around 1998, we started losing some of our lead sources because my competitors picked up on this. We were only giving them $100 an account. They started coming in offering $700 an account. And then I would lose lead sources or some would go out of business. And I realized as the internet started coming around in 1997, I started getting into the online credit card processing. And so we created one of the first drag and drop website builders that we actually called Virtual Merchant. And it was connected with credit card processing via Authorized Net or the Card Service Gateway. And that right there was the business. It no longer was just the credit card processing. We created an end-to-end business in a box. And in 1998, started our .com company and realized that we did so well with those lead sources that we needed to create our own lead source. And that was the Internet Toolbox, which really was the first of its kind. It's where the internet meets business opportunity world. And we showed people how to make money online. We put a couple 100,000 people online for the first time in their life with a Earthlink CD. Sky Dayton, the owner of Earthlink back then, I cut a deal. Everybody, I gave them a free 30-day CD. You remember the CDs? AOL did a lot of CDs. And everybody that converted, Sky Dayton from Earthlink would pay us $135 per account that upgraded. And so we had all these different things that we would do. We gave them websites, credit card processing. We had vendors like that were embedded in our product, and we would make affiliate fees. And yeah, I mean, it was just incredible. We had a lot of success with that. That was the impetus, though. It was that we needed to create our own lead source. And since we found ourselves right in the middle of the .com era with all those emerging markets, with people getting online with their business for the first time in their lives, we took advantage of that opportunity. It was massive. It was fun. A lot of fun.
That's so tremendous, Damien. And what I think is really interesting for our listeners, if we sort of double click into that, is a few key things. One, we talk about this in the book, this idea of like knowing who your ideal customer is and buying lists of those. And you were doing that. You were looking to serve businesses. So you went out there and got the list of all those new DBAs or doing business as accounts that were created so you could reach out to them. Now, a lot of businesses don't know where to find their ideal list, but you guys nailed that. And that started to get some early growth. But a second piece there I love is this idea of being in the right place at the right time. And so often when we talk to entrepreneurs and hear about things, there's a plan, there's an intention, but those pivotal moments are sometimes just circumstance. Like you had a business card on the table and the right person came along, which turned into a partnership of a lifetime. That wasn't on a marketing plan, a business plan. You didn't know that would happen, but that was so pivotal.
I try to think what would have happened if we never attended that show. I would have never understood what the business opportunity world was. And I'm still in that world today, 25 plus years later. So it's pretty interesting about timing, to your point.
Well, I think about events like that, conferences, trade shows, and so forth, where you might have a plan going in and you always should have some kind of plan. But oftentimes what comes out from that is not all what you're looking for. And many times it's way better, but it never would have come your way had you not just put yourself out there and been there. I mean, heck, Damien, when you and I met, we met in a high-end mastermind group, not knowing we were looking for each other, not knowing the relationship that would come from that. But that all came from being in the right room with the right people. And so for our listeners, if you're thinking about conferences or taking courses or attending, trade shows, that is where so many of the relationships you don't plan to find in your life come from. So get out there just like Damien did.
Yeah, absolutely. I recommend that 100%. In fact, I think it was about 2005-ish when we met, right?
Around there, yeah.
Around there.
Something else I want to point our listeners to.
That's 20 years ago, Jeremy. How crazy is that?
It's pretty wild, huh? Yeah, we were yet babies. So, Damien, something else you touched on is that the marketplace started to get more competitive, right? And you guys pivoted, right? As the customer acquisition cost was going up due to competition, you found a way to niche down where the competitors weren't. So you're able to get more business, which is beautiful. And there's so many more points in just that short story you shared with us that we could touch on. But let's keep going on your journey. And we're going to come back to a few of those. Pretty good feeling. So you guys went nationwide and you started using more direct response campaigns, including like long form TV infomercials. Tell us about that sort of broader market approach. Not every business can go big like that, but you guys did. What was that all about?
Yeah, because it was a new emerging market, right? People wanted to find out what's this thing of the internet. And I actually I got to give credit to a business partner at the time that created the internet toolbox for consumers. And it really was just to learn how to use the internet. I just imagine this is the first time people are getting on the internet. And so when I came into the picture, I wanted to teach them how to make money on the internet. And that was a whole new concept. And that was something that everybody wanted to learn. And that was a global epidemic. I mean, everybody wanted to figure out how to get online to make money. And so we capitalized on that timing, as you suggested. And, by doing that, we created it so that we could sell more merchant accounts. And, we ended up selling over 50,000 merchant accounts during that time, into the early 2000s. But yeah, I mean, we were in long form commercials, on TV that late night. And we had this nice little red box. And we had the guy from Tool Time, Al Borland, was our spokesperson. And we had him set up in a garage with a big toolbox. And he said, when you want to do business on the internet, you need the internet toolbox. And all you got to do is just pull this out right here, tape your pictures right here, and fax to the internet toolbox, and they'll create your website. I know this sounds crazy to you right now because it's so long ago, but it was the early generation of what this stuff was. And then we had a team in the background and we had a platform that would create these websites. And here's the thing, it was an opportunity because there was a lot of people that may not have a product or service. And our message was, if you don't have a product or service in mind, don't worry, we've got that covered too. And we did business with a company that had a drop ship white label scenario where they would drop ship the products that you could put on your website. And when you sell those products, they would ship it in your name. So it was an end-to-end solution. Again, started to sell more merchant accounts, wanted to take advantage of timing and the newness of the internet and businesses going on the internet. And we provided a total solution for that. So it was your product if you didn't have it. It was your online presence because we're going to build it for you. And it was the way you're going to take credit cards. A to Z. That's how, and I'll tell you a fun story about that, and then we can kind of move on in the journey. But there was a couple of guys that I remember that from Mo Products, MOW products.com. They're not around anymore. A couple of guys out in Arkansas, and they worked. I had a conversation with these guys. They worked for Lawnmower Blades business, and they slaved 12-hour days. They worked on weekends. They saw my commercial and for $50 bought the internet toolbox. They had their website up online. They found the manufacturer to put the lawnmower blades on, and they had their first six-figure year that first year. So really what this was about, Jeremy, we were changing lives of all walks of life all around the globe. And so I took a lot of pride and passion in that. And still to this day, that's my driving passion today.
Damien, a lot of business owners, I think, envision this forever hockey stick curve, that as things grow, it'll just continue to grow forever. And as we know, businesses don't always go that direction. They can kind of go one of three ways, right? So in your business, if we look forward towards 2019, did things keep going on up and forever, or what changed with your business over time?
We hit that valley, as you say, the peaks and valleys. We hit a valley in the year about 2005-ish, right about when we met. And that is when I jumped into a whole new world. And that's kind of why we met. So I did have to pivot. The infomercial wasn't producing as much. The ads cost cost more to get on CNN and ESPN and all the different channels that we were on. And we weren't producing the results that we were. And it just kind of, we slowly but surely just kind of like wound that down. But it was about pivoting and getting into the internet marketing world in 2006. And that started to change things for us. And, 2019 comes way later. But I do want to share this because this is probably a great story for our listeners here. In 2006, you might remember this, Jeremy, I went to a Bill Glazier, Dan Kennedy event. I was already kind of connected in the real estate investing world. That's where you and I met, if you remember the mastermind. And I had products and services, merchant accounts, bought a phone company in 2002. So we had PB Next. We had some products and services that were good for that market. But then I heard about this internet marketing world, and famous names like Russell Brunson and Ryan Dice and Frank Kern, right? I learned those names for the first time. So I went to this conference in Baltimore and I knew who the big players were. And this is a great tip for all of you. I walked right up to these three gentlemen that I did not know. And I basically said, hey, Ryan, I own a phone company. I have an SMS product. And I hear you got a big list. I want to let you use my product absolutely free. And I don't care if you send millions of messages. I said that same thing to the top three guys. And I realized they were the guys speaking on stage. Everybody was goating over them. So I was like, I went to those three guys. And I'll tell you what, I closed 2 out of 3 because how hard is it to sell a platform like that for free, right? But watch what happens with the story. So in 2010, when we started Go Mobile Solutions, that's when I actually had something that a guy like a Russell Brunson or a Ryan Dice could actually promote to their audience. And that's when I went knocking on the door. They had used my product for a couple of years free of charge. They couldn't believe it, by the way. Their response when I said that initially at the conference was like, who does that? And like Russell was like, wow, that's so cool. But again, reciprocity. I came back 4 years later when I had something that I thought would be fantastic. And it was an opportunity of giving people the opportunity to sell mobile apps, native mobile applications to restaurants and chiropractors and doctors, dentists, car dealerships, golf courses, you name it. And that started Go Mobile Solutions. And Russell promoted it to his audience. Ryan Dice promoted it to his audience. And then everybody got in line. And that was a phenomenal couple of years as we kicked off a brand new business. And, the iPhone and the App Store came out in 2007. So 3 years later, here we are, timing again. We're the first to be talking about an opportunity where you're in business selling native mobile applications. And quite frankly, Jeremy, you might remember this. Businesses were looking at it like, what? An app for a business? What? Angry Birds? And it was a lot harder to really sell that concept early on, but it was a great opportunity. And that is the company we still own today. We've gone through rebranding, but that's where it started in 2010.
Are you enjoying this episode? Make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. That'll help you get more episodes automatically as soon as they come out. So hit that subscribe button right now. And if you have a minute, leave a quick rating and review. That helps support the show. I heard a few interesting things there for our listeners I want to highlight, right? One is that in your earlier business with the credit card processing, as other companies came in, your cost to your partner went up. Right. And then in the more recent businesses, your ad costs, those started to go up and the channels you were working with became less effective over time. And we all see this in our business. And that's usually the start of these plateaus is the thing that got you to where you are either becomes too expensive to keep doing or just doesn't scale. And getting out of that is often challenging. And that almost always requires some kind of pivot or doing something new, not just doing the same thing over and over again. So Damien, in your case, you've shared a number of these really powerful pivots, whether it's, creating bundles or launching new products or launching new companies or bringing on newer partners. All these helps you to pivot and get back to growth. So now you got mobile apps out there. All of these things, by the way, serving that niche of business opportunities and helping people to get into business or promote their existing business in a whole variety of ways. What happened to that business? Where did things go? Where did 2019 take you?
So we had a great run, right? We built a big community and I'm very passionate about their success. I signed my emails, your success is my mission and always was my mission. And we started getting distracted in 2019 because we were growing. and we were creating more products and diluting our message. And it started to get away from me, and I didn't realize it. It started happening right around 2018. And I didn't realize it until it was kind of a little bit too late. And so if we get into kind of how we kept things afloat at that time with lots of employees, big overhead, we started taking on loans. And, that could be a slippery slope, and merchant account cash advances and all kinds of things like that. And it was in the first quarter of 2019 that, unfortunately I had to downsize. And in 2019 was an absolute bear of a year. And I look back on it now, and it's amazing how we pulled through. But no, things don't, the lessons that we learned there is things don't always stay the same, and things will 100% inevitably change. And you got to be ready for it. And we weren't ready for it, at that moment.
So what was that spiral like? We hear some of those earlier indicators, for example, borrowing and investing and pulling cash from other places, not to fund new growth, but just to fund overhead. Right? Where did that spiral take you? And, how did you find yourself at the lowest point and start to climb your way back out of that?
When I took over all of the upper management after the first quarter of 2019, so I became the CFO, the COO, the CMO, I became everything. And I kept a really core group of people that stayed with me, and some are with me today. And then I had some personal challenges as well, which definitely distracted my focus on the business, because I really had to retool, regroup, cut costs and things like that. And unfortunately, my daughter passed. My daughter, Sophia, at 16 years old, you met her, and she lost her battle to leukemia in August of 2019. And so it was the lowest point of my life. It was the darkest moment I've ever endured. And, what I did was I did some real deep down meditation. I really started to meditate a lot more. I was into meditation, but man, I went from meditating for 10 minutes to meditating for 2 hours. I went deep. And I really, right about December of 2019 is when the crash hit, because I just couldn't keep up with the merchant credit card processing cash advances taking as much as they were taking from our cash flow. And I just couldn't keep payroll going. I couldn't keep paying those debts, and got up to about $1 million worth of debt specifically for that business and what we were doing. And it was the proverbial crash, and the Titanic hit the iceberg. And that was hard to get through, but I did. And I did that through community. I did that through really just my community rallied around me. I was in a high-end mastermind group, which you and I are both in, with the Maverick 1000 group. And I really did something I'd never done before. I tapped mentorship. There you go. I tapped mentorship. I asked for help, and I got mentorship. I had been through downsizing, back at the Internet Toolbox days. I mean, we got up to 100 employees, and I had to downsize that. But 20 years removed, it was a different landscape. I felt like I was totally foreign to all of that, and I was in a new world. And so I asked for help, and I don't mean money. I asked for mentorship to guide me through the triage moment. And I got some really good advice from my mentors. And one was, you got to shore up right now, and you just got to stop the bleeding, and you got to communicate. You got to amplify communication to your partners, your vendors, your employees. You just keep that line of communication open. It's so important right now, but don't pay anyone. You have to stop. You have to stop the bleeding. And so we did. And that allowed us to stop the bleeding, but then comes a whole bunch of barrel of monkeys after that, of course.
So talk to us about that barrel of monkeys. You've got staff, you've got partners, you've got predatory lenders, vendors. What were those conversations like? How did you, shore things up?
Let them know truly from my heart, we're going to pull through this. The employees stayed with me and took half pay, didn't get paid on Christmas. They didn't get a Christmas bonus that year, but sure enough, a couple weeks into January, they started getting paid, and I kept that communication open with the vendors. My vendors gave me grace. The predatory lenders, they were the monkeys. They were the ones that I kind of had to navigate. I will say that the Mavericks threw an event in January in Costa Rica, another pivotal event that changed my life, the trajectory of my life, where it was going at that moment, and where I got to be around my brothers and sisters. part of this community that we're in, and created a couple new business ideas out of that event. Started Yannick Silver. I started a company with him in 2020. And so anyway, jumping ahead of myself there, but that event and that brotherhood, sisterhood, and that love that my wife and I got at that event that we really couldn't afford to go to, but it was a must. And so we did it. And I came back, and I'll tell you what, at that event, there was a Temescal. Have you ever been in one of those sweat lodges? I went in one for about an hour and a half, and I had 3 goals. 1, I wanted to reconnect with my daughter. 2, I wanted to know if I was going to go ahead and lay Go Mobile to rest and do it, find a way. And the 3rd was to find a way to do it with the most dignity possible and with the least amount of harm. And I came out of there, I suffered through that. And when I came out of there, I was clear. In fact, we all picked a word at that event. What was your word at this one event? And my word, since I had just recently moved to Mexico, was claro, which is clear. And they made a little necklace for me. So I got home and I just went to work. I went to work and I focused on the things that were the most important. I cleared out the distractions. I cut the expenses. I had lots of expenses. I was maybe about $36,000 a month in just software and storage and video storage and like just domain names and like you name it. The vendor list was stacked, and I slashed that down to about $5,000 a month. I mean, I don't even know how I did it to this day, but I did all the good work and I stayed focused. And my wife was a rock for me during that period of time. And my employees that stayed true and stayed loyal and stayed around, they had belief. And my community, like I said, they rallied around, my community. I just focused on what got us to that point. We cleared out all the distractions and all the other products and all the other messages, and we went back to mobile apps. And so the decision was we are going to charge forward, and we're going to do what we need to do. We needed to double our monthly recurring revenue on our subscribers for that mobile app business. We were charging $100 a month and $300 a month for people that were white label. And I just did the math. If I could just double those numbers, then I'm going to be able to make the payroll. I'm going to be able to make the expenses, because you can't keep trucking at $5,000 a month in expenses. You're going to have to bring some stuff on, and which we did, but we did it smart. And and we just kind of sustained. And then, the thing is 2020 happened and COVID happened. And, that was like devastating for a lot of people out there. And I'm going to tell you, in a weird way, it really helped us in a lot of ways. It helped me really connect more with my audience. It helped me, show up for them. Everybody was scared. And, as it would turn out, because of social distancing, QR codes became famous again. Holy moly. All of a sudden, mobile app message became like, I need an app. I want like contactless payments. I want like really good looking menus on the phone. And so we had a whole resurgence of business in that opportunity. So COVID actually kind of propped us up a little bit.
There's 2 things I want to just recap for our listeners there. One is this concept of expense reduction. We have a whole bonus chapter in the book from an interview I had, Damien, with your friend and my friend Mark, who is like the guy on expense reduction at a massive level. And you did exactly that. You went from, you said $36,000 a month down to $5,000 a month in expenses. Many of us don't realize all the expenses that keep creeping into our business that just get paid and we don't think twice about, right? And one of those big strategies is going through and looking at your expenses, because profitability you can impact by raising revenue, right? Raising prices, raising profit margin. You can also raise profitability by reducing expenses. And so you really attack that on both sides, on the expense reduction massively, but also on this doubling down and really focusing in on the mobile app model. I want to double click into that a little further and talk about what you did to double the revenue on that particular business. What was the strategy you used to 2x?
Okay. So first I'm going to address the expense reduction part, because this is a great tip for our listeners here, is most people have all their vendors on credit cards or debit cards, your actual company operating account. Cancel the cards, 100%. Because now the ones that you want to put back on the card, they got to really be worth it, right? And so that is a quick fix. Now, to your question, mobile apps is what got us to where we were, and we had most of our success. even though we were launching 2 products a year that were going off in different directions, for a good 12 plus years there. And so the focus was on the product, the solution, the opportunity that is the mobile apps. And we just started going live and bringing the community together, doing content pieces every Friday so they'd have a place to go and hang out. And so what happened was I got more loyalty from my audience. We were able to take that monthly recurring revenue and double it, because that was my target. If I could just double that. And so the main answer was focus. If I continued to distract our community with multiple messages and different products, I wasn't going to double the recurring revenue. That was my best asset that could create sustainability. And when we did that, it helped us to sustain through 2020 and 2021. And then we started to get on that growth path again. So that's why it was so important. And the verb was focus.
Yeah. And that ties right back to the word that came out from the HUD as well, the claro. You had that clarity, that focus, and really dialed it in. So when you and I have talked about what you did to pivot and get back to growth, you used so many different strategies to impact the F, the A, and the Q lever in that formula. But Clara, focus, dialing in on one at a time. How did you choose which strategies to implement first and which ones to implement later and which ones to not implement?
It was actually pretty easy, right? Since my focus was on the recurring revenue, which was $100 a month payments and $300 a month payments, every time I went live and would do a webinar with my community, I was talking about that and letting them know how, yes, we started in 2010, but here we are 10 years later in 2020. And I would always say this message. I basically said this message for 15 plus years now. It's never been a better time to be in the business of mobile applications than right now. And that was so true in 2020, all over again. And so it was a little bit easier for me to really hone in on that focus, kind of propped up a little bit. But yeah, the frequency of if it did not offer recurring revenue, it got no attention. Everything we sold had recurring revenue, and we wouldn't entertain anything else. And for the first couple of years there, it was just all about the same message about mobile applications. So again, focus, and then getting down into what mattered most, which was to beef up the recurring revenue and also to keep my customers for longer. And the way I did that was deliver more value, deliver more value, deliver more value. When I look back just at a couple of years prior, right before things started to slide, we had lost a lot of that. There was a lot less value, a lot less time with the community, a lot less content delivery, and I'm not really proud of that. Things were just growing and getting big, and, they saw the rawness. The community, I got to give it to them, because they saw the true passion for their success and the focus, and they focused on their business. They started to focus, and then they started having more success, and that'll keep them around longer. Right? They'll continue to pay their monthly subscription fees because I continue to surprise and delight them with value.
The industry term for what we're talking about here for our listeners is churn, right? The customers you're losing that are on your recurring revenue, and how to reduce churn. In the book, actually, Damien, I call you out in your businesses and some of the strategies that were used to reduce that churn. You touched on a few of these just now. Can you share a bit more about what you were seeing churn-wise and how you're able to retain and keep some of those recurring monthly members with you for even longer, in turn increasing that customer lifetime value?
Number one, don't let them forget about you. Be in their inbox every day if you can. Every day if you can. And number two, don't always be selling. I know that there's a famous quote, ABC, always be closing. No, take a different approach. Always be delivering value. And that was it. Right there. Just don't let them forget about you. And when they interact with you, it's value. And, that gives them hope. That gives them confidence. That helps their journey of success. It gives them inspiration. And that's it. I just bleeding passion. And I think that's how I affect churn. And so of course we've got to deliver what we say we're gonna deliver. And of course we got to deliver timely. And all those things that are the basic principles of keeping a customer happy. But I went over and above. I wanted to surprise and delight, and just didn't let them forget about me. And every time they thought about me, it was positive, right? Like I'm in their inbox, I'm giving them motivation and giving them, reminding them of their why, why they decided to start their entrepreneur journey through content and focus and value. That's how we combat churn.
What I'm hearing there, Damien, is you always want to be delivering that value and staying present and top of mind. And one of the ways I think you did that is on the content side, the happy hour series. So content is a strategy we talk about often, not just in terms of finding new leads and increasing the quantity of customers, but increasing the value of that relationship with your existing customers, prospects, and so forth. Walk us through what that happy hour series was and how content really helped you out in terms of nurturing and providing that value.
Yeah, great segue there, because back to the COVID, one of my peers had a happy hour, literally, and it was on Zoom. And he sent a message out there and he said, hey, you know what? I can't go to the bar, so I want all my friends to come hang out with me, and we're just going to shoot the shit, and we're just going to, talk. And it was because Friday nights, and it was Friday nights. So I did that, and it was a couple of late nights because we couldn't go out, right? We were all, and I said, you know what? I need to do this for our community. And I called it the Happy Hour Series. And it wasn't about drinking or anything like that. It was about come and network together, have your cameras on, meet your peers, get value. Me and the staff will be on there delivering value. And that's kind of how it started. And we went till 3:00 in the morning a couple times. And people were like, please keep doing these. Well, it wasn't till about a month in, maybe a month and a half in, after about 6 weeks, every Friday, I started realizing, you know what? I want to start bringing on guests very similar to this right here. And you were one of my guests. And like the names that I mentioned earlier were my guests. And, my goal was to try to pick the people that I thought would deliver the most value and meet our community where they were at and would be timely messaging. So we had branding experts, we had sales experts, we had, you name it. We did it every Friday. And you know what? When I look back, it was wild because we did that for before you knew it, it was 3.5 years had gone by. And I might have missed a handful of Fridays because of holidays or things like that. But I stayed committed to it. Now, we stopped doing that after about 3.5 years. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of work, but it did give us a tremendous amount of content. And I still have people today. There was someone just last week on one of my lives, because we still do lives. It's just not on Friday night, and it's, not the same format. But he's like, man, I really loved those happy hours. Wondered if you can get back to those. And I'm like, I'll consider that. But yeah, that was a good time.
Now, Damien, I'm hearing something there, which is this consistency, this grit. And I think for a lot of business owners, they start one thing, they try a new marketing effort, and then they shift gears, they try something else, they get distracted, try something else. And so they're in this sort of spray pattern of trying a million different things, but not giving anything the time it needs to really get to a result through the consistency. There's some stat like the number of podcasts that make it to 100 episodes is sub 1% or something, right? Yet the consistency is what really builds the audience and builds that platform, or the number of folks who, stick with really any of these different marketing initiatives is so low. And yet you created this happy hour series, not as a sales channel, but as a way of creating content and keeping the community together. And you stuck with it. And it was that consistency that really brought those results. So bravo on that. And for our listeners, if you're trying something out, give it some time to get a result before you just give up on it and try the next new thing.
Yeah. And it wasn't easy to stay that committed. Plenty of Fridays where I was met with do I change it? But I stayed committed.
I think of, the mornings I'm going out in the dark and the cold and the wet for a run and asking myself what the heck I'm doing. And then I remember, like the consistency is what gets a result, and you still get out there, even if it seems like a nice idea to stay in bed, right? You could skip going to the gym, but I know you're not going to do that. You're not going to get a result or see a change if you decide to just change focus every other day. So the consistency gets the result. All right. So Damien, you've walked us through this growth, this drop down to the lowest of low in so many ways, and the stabilization. Let's talk about what happened post-stabilization. You launched some new products. You got some other big hits, instant leads, on demand comes to mind. Talk to us about some of the newer things you launched and what that meant for the business.
Yeah. So really understanding my audience and knowing that they were in business. They were agencies, right? Back to that business opportunity. We were creating an opportunity with the mobile apps for people to go to businesses and sell them mobile applications for them to succeed in their business, right? And so we started creating better products utilizing AI as that started coming around. And we got into a few really key areas, buyer intent data. So capturing data of people that land on websites, for instance, which, 98% of the people that land on your website, you're going to lose. They don't opt in, they don't buy. But we have the way to buy that data, and we can, through celebrated ways of marketing, we can retarget, and there's all these different ways. Well, then we started getting into, what else would our audience need so they can be more successful selling leads as a service, selling data as a service? My message was that data was the new gold. And that was, now we have the data, what do we do with it? And now we rolled out AI outreach, where our AI is literally going to go out there and do the research on Jeremy Shapiro to know that he has this podcast series, and will know that he just launched a book, and will know maybe some things in his personal life too, and really craft messaging that feel personal. And then it's frequency. And that product and service is the next in line for our resellers and white label partners to leverage, right? We taught them the skill of leverage. All of this is done for you services now. So since we do the done for you mobile apps, we did that successfully very well for the last 12 of the 15 years. All of the products and services recognize and know our customer. We know that their clients need these products and services, but they're not going to want to get lost in the tech. They're not going to want to get lost in the delivery. And so being able to build products and services that meet their demand, meet the market's demand, and then helps get them out of their own way by providing as much done for you on the delivery. And so that's what we shifted into. We shifted into more done for you delivery on products and services that people want and need right now.
So you managed to double your recurring revenue again. And that sounds like that's what helped to free you up to focus on investing in new products, partnerships, and so forth. What was that like, suddenly not worrying about that monthly, not as much, and gaining back that freedom for more clarity in pursuing investment in products and partnerships?
Well, that's the thing, right? So as the revenue stabilized and as the revenue continued to come in and we started meeting our KPIs and meeting our goals, I really needed to get, one thing that I learned in my entire career, that you're only as good as your team. And I was stripped of my team by force in 2019. And through sustaining, I wasn't scaling up the team. And so if we're going to grow, and if we're going to bring new products to the market, and if we're going to serve this community, we need to build a solid team. And that's one of my things I'm most proud of, is the teams that I've built over the years in my career. And so when you start bringing in the revenue and you start hitting the KPIs, start hitting the goals, you can start to afford to attract good talent. Yeah, we have a new CMO this last year. We have a new COO this year. Exactly, new CFO. You really start to build in that upper management again, because at the end of the day, the only way you're going to get to the promised land, as they say, is by having a really solid team. How do you get to the Super Bowl? You build a championship team. And so I'm big on that. And I highly recommend for all our listeners that, you're not going to be able to do it by yourself forever. It's all about building that dream team.
It's funny, when I talk to solopreneurs who are still doing everything in their business, we talk about the next first hire that they can be making in the business and what they'll take on. And when you're a business owner doing everything yourself and you bring on someone doing 40 hours a week of work with you, that frees you up so much. That lets you work on higher value tasks in the business. That lets you hire more. You get to reinvest in the business and you start doing the team building. And at a higher level, like what you're talking about, Damien, now we're talking like the C-suite hires, who you bring on to actually run the company and oversee various big things within the business. And that's not just a new product or new marketing. That's now building team. And that absolutely is something to be hugely proud of. So Damien, if you're talking to an entrepreneur in their journey, facing some of the challenges that you faced, getting stuck, not knowing how to get through it, what advice would you have for them?
This might seem basic, but it truly is what set me free, is develop a routine. And for me, it was daily exercise every single day, consistency. It allowed my brain to process, and meditation, deep meditation. That was my routine every morning without fail. And, as basic as that sounds, I would recommend to anybody that if you can develop whatever routine looks like for you, a routine will set you free and really give you the chance to clear your mind so that you're making better decisions and making less mistakes. And you're tapping into creativity that will allow you to structure more deals, create new products, chart new territory. And so that's the first piece of advice that I would give anybody that really needed to dig down and pivot, is to develop a routine that you can stay married to and be consistent.
Now, is that the same advice you'd give yourself? Like, knowing what you know now, looking back at where you were, what would you do differently?
I wouldn't really change much of what I did coming out of that 2019, because we stayed in business, we sustained, and we started to grow, and we're here today. And, that is not easy, and was never easy. Any part of the journey was never easy. But I would say, I would have probably started growing faster. I took a little bit of time to really make sure that we're stable, we've sustained, we're meeting all expenses, we're growing in the right areas before I started bringing on new products and new ideas, and before I started scaling up my team. So just really getting clear and making the right decisions. So yeah, I would have maybe done it a lot faster. It was 2022 before we started, the late 2022 before we really started growing again. And then 23 was a nice growth year. And, now here we are.
Nice. So Damien, we've talked a lot about doubling this or increasing that or decreasing that. And you touched on KPIs before. You and I both love dashboards in our business and looking at key performance indicators. What do you do now to track your stats and KPIs to ensure that you hit your ambitious goals? Like, I know you have plans to double revenue again. What are you looking at to make sure you're on track to do that?
You nailed it. I remember the old duck dashboards. Remember that? Here's the thing, Jeremy, and you know this, and I want all the listeners to understand this. If you don't know your numbers, you don't know your business. And, it's real easy for things to get carried away. And, where you've overcommitted and where you then start like taking the sacrifice. You got to pay everybody first, pay yourself last. And that can hurt. That can hurt. So it's really about knowing your numbers, knowing what it's going to take before you bring on new salary. Like, we've got to hit certain numbers before we can solve that area of our business. Before I can bring on a full-time chief marketing officer, we need to be doing X amount of revenue. And this is where we are. This is where we are on monthlies. This is where we are on new monies coming in. This is what the churn looks like. This is what the stick ratio looks like. And really just dashboard all that out. Use all the different technologies you can. Use AI, whatever. But really, it's important to know your numbers so that you don't get carried away and you don't make mistakes and you don't end up in a spiral like I did in 2019. And, my goal is to never be in that position again. And one way of ensuring that is to know your numbers and know them daily, be able to pull them up on the fly and be able to make the adjustments in the operation. For instance, if the churn is starting to creep up, then that's what you need to address. And that's what you need to work on. And so that you can keep your customers around longer and find the things that you need to do that. Do more content, do more value, surprise and delight them. The timing of when you're in their inbox, the timing of when they get to hear from you, all that is important because we have to address churn. Well, maybe it's not churn, maybe it's new revenue. Well, then that's what the team needs to focus on. It needs to be an all hands on deck to address the area that needs the most addressing.
You're touching on something we talk about a lot, which is this whole theory of constraints. You look at where that constraint is, what needs the attention now, that gets the attention till it's no longer the biggest constraint. Then you move on to what is now the new biggest constraint, and you just iterate and do that again and again and again. So to recap for our listeners, Damien, you moved from being over $1 million in debt and facing business insolvency to successfully cutting expenses and motivating your team, intensely focusing on doubling your core recurring revenue, which ultimately financed new growth hits, allowing you to double your overall revenue again and focus on continued scaling. Is that right?
That's correct.
So for our listeners who want to learn more about you, Damien, where should they go right now?
BeBoldCorp.com. That's where you can learn all about us. And if you'd like a strategy call, I'm more than willing to do that as well. And you can learn all about that on BeBoldCorp.com.
Love it. Damien, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing with us so much of your journey from the highs to the lows to the even highs. This has been fantastic. I love being a part of your journey and seeing your journey over all these years. You are such an incredible entrepreneur, business person, and human. And it's really great to connect and share your story and more of what you've been doing with the world.
Thank you, Jeremy. I really appreciate it. I appreciate being here. And I appreciate our relationship for so many years, over 2 decades now. And thank you. Thank you again.
I share the story often when we talk about like mastermind groups that when I joined the group where you and I had met up, there were promises that were made to me about what we get by joining that group. The reality is we never got the deliverables that we were promised. But what I did get was worth so much more than that. And the relationships that came from that are some of the very few people who, when I see their name or their face on my phone, are the calls that I take. And I'm proud to say you are one of those people that I met in that room that to this day, like my face lights up when I see it's you on the other end. Because I've not had a phone ringer on my phone ever. Since my first phone in the 90s, I've never had a ringtone. So when I see your name or your face, you're one of those people who I'm like, I'm so glad it's you. And that's only because we happened to meet by putting myself out there and trying something new. And I love that we did that. So thanks, Damien. Thanks so much for listening. Quick reminder, hit that subscribe button right now so you can get more episodes when they come out automatically. And remember to leave that rating and review right now.